Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Kahan, and I'm coming to you from my quarantine desk to deliver a little talk on modern and contemporary architecture in Palm Beach. Thanks very much to Amanda Skyer and the Preservation Foundation of Palm Beach for inviting me to do this. I'd like to delve into the history of both modern and contemporary architecture in our area, as well as to cover some recent examples that both further and build on the tradition. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a Palm Beach-based architect and one of 4 principals at Smith & Moore Architects. As a firm, we've been practicing in Palm Beach for 36 years now, across a broad range of styles. As with many architects locally, the last 15 years has brought a demand for more modern and contemporary architecture, which has required us to gain a better understanding of both the historical context of the styles and how best to allow designs in these styles to find themselves at home in the fabric and built environment of Palm Beach. Certainly anyone with a passing familiarity would think of Palm Beach as a place mostly dotted with the classic examples of Meisner and Fascio's Mediterranean Revival style, and they wouldn't be wrong. They would also associate the island colonial, Bermuda, and Palm Beach Regency styles with the island. Those with a broader historical familiarity with the architecture history of Palm Beach may also associate the long tradition of the international style, mid-century modern, tropical modern, and contemporary styles. I think that understanding the place and evolution of each of these styles in Palm Beach is actually quite similar. For while many people view these quote-unquote classical examples of Palm Beach as pure specimens of classical architecture and the orthodoxy of proportion, in truth, they are almost uniformly Mannerist interpretations of a multitude of European and colonial styles. Now, don't get me wrong, this makes them no less wonderful as examples of fabulous architecture, and fabulous residential architecture at that. They respond to the idea of context, climate, and scale in the way that sensitive architecture should. They establish a tone and a mood. They play with the ideas of procession, with the ideas of large formal spaces and small intimate spaces. They understand the variations of domestic life, even in a place as occasionally formal as Palm Beach. Indeed, the masters that we so revere may have inherently imbued their works with an understanding of classical proportion and a sense of scale that relates to both the surrounding context and the people inhabiting their structures. But these works would not stand up to a rigorous classical study and Vitruvian examination, nor do they need to. What makes them great is that they inherently understand those rules and consciously and playfully break them as needed. In the case of Meisner, flaunting the rules was more painterly and outwardly Mannerist. In the case of Fascio and others, these transgressions were more tongue-in-cheek. They were all, nonetheless, great. I begin this discussion of modernism in Palm Beach this way, in order to say that the great historical and current examples of modern and contemporary architecture in Palm Beach understand these ideas in a similar way, and break these rules with strong understanding and purpose. I'll return to these local examples momentarily, but I think this may be a good moment to talk a bit about modernism more broadly, and the areas of its history that funnel themselves into the modernist works of merit that we have here in Palm Beach. It is undeniably true that since their inception in the early parts of the 20th century, there's been an arm of modernist and contemporary design that has dismissed history and its historical antecedents out of hand. For many critics and citizens of the world alike, these practitioners have provided ample reason to dismiss modernism and contemporary design uniformly. In certain contexts, such as Palm Beach, one could certainly understand these arguments, and I would tend to agree with them. However, I do believe that a certain very prominent arm of modernism, since its early days, has made an effort to understand the historical antecedents and the architecture throughout humanity. These modernists understood the inherent beauty found in the ideas of classical rhythm, order, and proportion. They also clearly understood the concept of scale in a way that is often unfairly divorced from modernism. These pioneers like Mies van der Rohe, Le Corbusier, Paul Rudolph, Frank Lloyd Wright, Piero Portaluppi, and Carlo Scarpa often had the benefit of classical training. They took that foundation, and in the mannerist methods of Meisner and Fascio, began their own methods of experimentation. They studied the human form and its relationship to space. They studied materiality and the visceral evocation it can have for all five senses. They went through a process of distillation, of careful editing, that in the end had the ability to yield pure space, still inherently comfortable and beautiful in the subconscious way that classical composition can be. Examples like the images we see here from Corbusier's Villa Savoie and Mies's Barcelona Pavilion and Farnsworth House. On a grander scale, Mies's Seagram building from the mid-century. And on a smaller scale, one can look at the case study house program with work by Neutra, Eames, and many more. Contemporaneously, California architects like Irving Gill were also practicing in this style with projects like the Dodge House seen here. Certainly these buildings do not hew perfectly to the rules of proportion, but they do ascribe to a system of order that makes them beautiful and contextual. Later in the century, Italian rationalists like Piero Portaluppi and Carlo Scarpa made more literal allusions to their classical antecedents, employing a similar process of distillation, albeit more restrained. This period also saw larger scale exemplars of this edited classicism, such as the Palazzo della Civiltà Italiana in Rome by Giovanni Garini, known to many now as the headquarters to the fashion house Fendi. Back in Palm Beach and South Florida more broadly, the early part of the century saw experimentation in a contextualized version of modernism, sometimes veering into styles like Art Deco and streamline moderne. Buildings like the Miami Beach Post Office and the original Norton Gallery of Art in West Palm Beach by Wyeth showcase the idea of rendering classical forms down to more simple expressions of form and contextual materiality. Some of the earliest examples of modern houses in Palm Beach followed these styles as well, with Maurice Fascio designing two examples of modern architecture that still exist today in the Reef from 1936 and Villa Today from 1931. He also designed Out of Bounds from 1940, seen here in its original form. Later, there would be great examples of modernism in Palm Beach, all sadly lost now. Seen here, Volks La Ronda from 1969, which played on a more organic basis of form, in a similar manner to Wright's Guggenheim Museum from a decade sooner, and Corbusier's Church Ronchamp in France. Alfred Browning Parker, the famed Florida modernist, also had numerous houses in Palm Beach, including the Mass Residence from 1954 and the Manus Residence, both of which sadly have been lost. In more recent years, the tradition of quality modernism has continued, not without its share of missed attempts. The renowned architect Richard Meyer designed a house along the lake in 1977, which is now neighbored by a number of additional lakefront modern homes. More recently, the last decade has also seen its share of the sort of modernism I have been describing. In the mid-2000s, the firm 1100 Architect from New York designed a house for Kelly Klein, seen here. Contextual materiality and a sense of both scale and proportion give the house a sense of ease on its site. More recently, examples of both traditional modernism and tropical modernism have been seen on the in-town blocks of Seaview and Seabreeze. I designed the house seen here at lower right. In the past few years, I've also been working on refining this process of classical concepts distilled. Most recently, I designed and completed a house on Jungle Road for Ken Carrickle and Jim Held that was awarded with the 2019 Schuler Award from the Preservation Foundation. This project is truly the embodiment of the process of editing and refinement that I have been discussing and reflects the lessons learned over the years. As I mentioned earlier, the rules of order and classicism came into play in the composition of the plan and facades, beginning with the rules of a classical order, as I would for a villa or a Georgian country house, and composing correct heights and placements for rooms, walls, and openings. From there, the careful process of editing and distilling out everything extraneous yielded form and space that was both as pure and as welcoming as possible. In short, I believe that successful modernism is not a shunning of the principles of classicism, but rather a clear understanding of the ideas, proportion, scale, truth in utmost quality and materiality, tectonic expression, rhythm, and order. From that understanding, great modern architecture applies those rules, occasionally breaking them quite deliberately and willfully, but more generally, putting them through a process of distillation, carefully and delicately removing layers of ornament without sacrificing intent. When done successfully, the result is a purity of space and expression, subconsciously understandable as sharing the same genesis and thought and understanding as classically designed buildings. The simplicity embodied in all aspects of the design need to be pure, without contrivances or compromises. The great effort in making it perfect must be hidden. It must appear as if it could not logically be any other way, and that the grace and precision are effortless. Other recent examples of successful modernism in Palm Beach that I believe understand context, proportion, and scale are the project by Studio MK27 from Brazil, seen here. Dubbed the G House, this was recently awarded the Schuler Award from the Preservation Foundation. I was lucky enough to have been a part of the design and construction team on this, alongside Marcio Kogan and his team, who are all exceptional examples of modernists with understandings of the principles I have been describing. Then here we see a recently completed project by noted modern architects Todd Williams and Billy Shen, who are based in New York. Most well known for their design of the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia and the American Folk Art Museum in New York, Todd and Billy brought a sense of grace and care to the details and materiality that are truly commendable. One final example I'd like to show that does not take this editing process to quite the same extreme is a project that is not yet built, but will hopefully begin soon at the southwestern tip of Everglades Island. This house takes at its core principle the concept of a traditional courtyard home. It too begins with a traditional ordering and proportion system and is then carefully edited and stylized. In this case, the examples I showed earlier of the Norton and Piero Portaluppi's Villanecchi, where the inspiration and the aspects of the ornamentation are permitted to stay. The final result is classical space, rendered in contextual materials like coral, through the lens of modernist editing. I want to thank everyone for their time today. Hopefully this has been interesting and informative. I have a deep love for both classicism and modernism and feel that the two should be linked in their derivation from what is beautiful and comfortable to the human form. I have no doubt that this will spur conversations with you all around town, and I very much look forward to it. Stay well, everyone.